I was 12 when my world turned upside down. That morning started like any other. Dad kissed me goodbye before heading to work at the construction company where he was a site manager. Mom barely looked up from her phone as he left. I remember thinking how strange it was that they used to be so different with each other. My name is Melanie Carter, and that was the last time I saw my father alive. He collapsed at work that afternoon, a massive heart attack, they said. I was in math class when the principal called me to her office. Mom was already there, her mascara perfectly intact despite the news she'd just received. "Your father's gone, Melanie," she said, her voice steady. Too steady. I broke down crying, but Mom just sat there, patting my back mechanically. That evening, I overheard her on the phone with her friend Linda. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but Mom's voice carried through the thin walls of our suburban home. "Actually, Linda, this might be for the best," she said, her voice low but clear. "Being a widow is much more respectable than being divorced. Plus, I get to keep everything without the hassle of lawyers." She laughed, actually laughed. I know. I'll play the grieving widow at the funeral. I've already picked out the perfect black dress." I sat on the stairs, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from screaming. Dad's sister, Aunt Sarah, was the only one who seemed to see through Mom's act at the funeral. While everyone else was offering condolences to my devastated mother, Aunt Sarah just stood there, shaking her head sadly. She knew. She'd always known how Mom treated Dad. It didn't take Mom long to heal from her loss. Within 3 months, she started having a man over for dinner. His name was Richard Thompson, and he had 2 kids from his previous marriage, Brandon, who was 11, and Emma, who was 10. Mom would cook elaborate meals when they visited, something she'd never done for Dad. "Melanie, honey," Mom said one evening, her voice syrupy sweet. "Richard and I have something to tell you." I knew what was coming. The way they sat together on the couch, holding hands, Mom beaming like a teenager, it was obvious. "We're getting married," Mom announced. "Isn't it wonderful? You'll have a new father and siblings." I forced a smile, but inside, my stomach was turning. "That's great, Mom. Congratulations." Richard smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Brandon and Emma are so excited to have a new sister," he said, but I'd seen how his kids looked at me during their visits, like I was something stuck to the bottom of their expensive sneakers. That night, I called Aunt Sarah and cried for hours. She listened patiently, then said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes, sweetie, the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. Remember that." Brandon and Emma moved in the week after the honeymoon. They immediately claimed the best rooms in the house, including my playroom, which became Emma's art studio. When I tried to protest, Mom just said, "Don't be selfish, Melanie. We need to make them feel welcome." Mom transformed into a completely different person after marrying Richard. She'd spend hours helping Emma with her homework or watching Brandon's soccer practice, while I ate dinner alone in my room. The way she looked at Richard, it was like he hung the moon and stars just for her. I'd never seen her look at Dad that way. "Brandon needs new cleats for soccer," she'd say, or "Emma's taking art classes this summer." There was always money for what they needed. Meanwhile, I learned to stop asking for anything. Even basic things like new school supplies came with size and eye rolls, as if I was being unreasonable for needing pencils. They started taking trips together, nothing fancy, just weekend getaways to nearby cities or camping trips to state parks. But I was never invited. "You'll just be bored," Mom would say, not even looking at me as she packed snacks for Brandon and Emma. "Besides, someone needs to feed the cat." I'd end up at Aunt Sarah's house during these trips. Her small cottage became more of a home to me than our house ever was. She never had kids of her own, but she treated me like the daughter she never had. "This isn't right, Melanie," she'd say, watching me unpack my overnight bag for what felt like the 100th time. "A mother shouldn't play favorites like this." I shrugged, trying to act like it didn't hurt. "At least I have you, Aunt Sarah." One evening, when I was 16, I decided to bring up college during dinner. I'd been researching schools, dreaming about studying business management. "Mom," I said, carefully choosing my moment when everyone was in a good mood. I wanted to talk about college applications. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. "College? Melanie, we can't afford to send you to college. We need to think about Brandon and Emma's education." Brandon smirked across the table, and Emma didn't even try to hide her satisfied grin. Richard just kept eating, as if the conversation didn't concern him at all. Later that night, I cornered Mom in the kitchen. "What about Dad's money?" I asked. "He had life insurance, and he'd been saving for years." Mom's face hardened. "I've spent that money taking care of you for the past 4 years," she snapped. "Food, clothes, shelter, did you think all that was free?" "Stop being so arrogant, Melanie. You can't just demand things from me." I stood there, stunned by her cold tone and the obvious lie in her words. Dad had worked hard to save for my future, and now it was all gone, spent on her new perfect family while I watched from the sidelines. The next weekend, I went to Aunt Sarah's house, with tears still burning in my eyes. We sat at her kitchen table, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, as I told her everything about Mom's cruel dismissal of my college dreams. Aunt Sarah listened quietly, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. When I finished, she got up without a word and disappeared into her study. I heard drawers opening and closing, then she returned with a thick envelope. "Your father came to see me about 2 weeks before he died," she said, sliding the envelope across the table. "It was strange, he seemed worried, almost like he knew something was going to happen. He gave me this and made me promise to keep it safe until you were ready for college." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a bank statement showing a substantial savings account in my name, with Aunt Sarah as the trustee. Dad had been secretly putting money aside for years. "He said your mother had been acting different," Aunt Sarah explained, her voice soft. "He wanted to make sure your future was secure, no matter what happened. The money's been gathering interest all these years." I burst into tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude and love for my father, who'd protected me even after he was gone. "We can't tell Mom about this," I said, wiping my eyes. Aunt Sarah nodded in agreement. Over the next 2 years, I focused on my studies while keeping quiet about my college plans. Brandon and Emma took every opportunity to remind me of my supposed future. "Hey, Melanie," Brandon would smear in the hallway, "I heard the diner downtown needs a dishwasher. Better get your application in early." Emma would join in, "Maybe if you're lucky, they'll let you bus tables too." They'd laugh like it was the funniest joke in the world. I just walked past them, my silence driving them crazy. Then came graduation day. I'd barely taken off my cap and gown when Mom and Richard called me into the living room for a serious discussion. They sat on the couch like judges about to pass sentence, while I stood before them. "Melanie," Richard began, his voice stern, "you're 18 now. We've been generous, but you need to understand that you can't live here forever. You need to find a job and start earning your own living." I smiled calmly. "I understand completely. I'll be moved out by next week." They exchanged surprised looks. Clearly, they'd expected resistance or tears. Mom opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then closed it again. "Well, good," Richard finally managed. "That's very mature of you." Neither of them asked where I planned to go or how I would support myself. They were too relieved that I'd agreed so easily to risk asking questions that might complicate things. Moving day arrived faster than I expected. I packed my life into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. It was surprising how little I'd accumulated over the years, almost like I'd been subconsciously preparing for this moment all along. Aunt Sarah pulled up in her blue Honda at exactly 9 in the morning. I watched through my bedroom window as she parked, half expecting Mom or someone else to come see what was happening. But the house remained silent, even though I could see movement behind the curtains of Emma's room. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared completely. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt lighter with each mile we put between us and that house of carefully crafted pretenses. I spent that summer working at the Sunshine Cafe, serving coffee and sandwiches to regulars who always tipped well and treated me like family. The owner, Mrs. Peterson, even let me pick up extra shifts when I wanted to save more for college expenses. September came, and I boarded a plane to start my new life at Marshall State University, 3 states away from everything I'd known. The business management program was challenging, but I threw myself into it completely. My roommate, Jessica, became my first real friend since middle school. She didn't know my whole story at first, but when she did learn about it, she just hugged me and said, "Their loss, girl, their loss." Mom's Facebook page became my window into the life I'd left behind. There they were, the perfect family, smiling at Brandon's soccer tournaments, celebrating Emma's art show victories, taking vacation selfies at the beach. The captions always read like marketing copy, "So proud of our amazing kids," or "Nothing better than family time." I was never mentioned, not even once. It was like I'd never existed. Holidays were spent at Aunt Sarah's, cooking together and watching old movies. We created our own traditions, and they meant more to me than any forced family dinner ever had. Sometimes she'd catch me looking at Mom's social media posts and gently take my phone away. "Don't torture yourself," she'd say. "You're making your own story now." And I was. I graduated summa cum laude, with job offers already lined up thanks to my internships and academic performance. Jessica's father, Mr. Reynolds, ran a major marketing firm, and he'd noticed my work during a class project showcase. "We need sharp minds like yours," he said during my interview. "Your professors speak very highly of you." I started in the junior analyst position, but I wasn't content to stay there. I worked late, took on extra projects, and studied market trends in my free time. Within 5 years, I'd been promoted twice and had enough savings for a down payment on my own apartment. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I stood in my empty living room, keys in hand, and finally let myself cry. They were happy tears, tears of pride, of accomplishment, of knowing that I'd made it on my own terms. Then came the biggest surprise. Mr. Reynolds called me into his office one morning, about 7 years after I'd started at the company. "We're creating a new position," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Senior Director of Strategic Development. The board and I agree you're the right person for the job." I opened the folder and nearly gasped at the salary figure. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making, especially at my age. I never saw the point in broadcasting my life online. Sure, I had social media accounts, but I mostly used them to share occasional photos of sunsets or coffee shops. Aunt Sarah was the only one who knew about my promotions, my new apartment, or the sleek black Mercedes I'd bought myself as a reward for landing the director position. "You've earned every bit of it," she'd say proudly whenever I shared my achievements with her. Meanwhile, Brandon and Emma's social media feeds were like endless highlight reels of mediocrity. Brandon would pose next to his used Hyundai Elantra with captions like "Living the Dream," "Blessed," "Luxury Life," while Emma shared photos of herself at the local mall, tagging designer brands she clearly couldn't afford. One post particularly made me laugh, Brandon standing next to his car at some local car show, writing, "When hard work pays off. Success, entrepreneur." I was reading this while sitting in my Mercedes AMG, worth more than his annual salary, but I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Then came the message that changed everything. It popped up on my Facebook one Tuesday morning. "Melanie, it's your mother. My 55th birthday is coming up next month, and I'm having a celebration at an expensive restaurant, Le Blanc. You've probably never heard of it. I expect you to attend. It's on the 15th, 7 p.m. sharp. Don't embarrass me." I stared at the screen, reading the message multiple times. 12 years of silence, and this was how she reached out? "No, how are you?" No attempt to bridge the gap. Just a command to appear at her party, with that subtle dig about the restaurant's price point. I almost deleted the message right there. But something stopped me, curiosity, maybe, or the desire to see what would happen. I called Mr. Reynolds and requested a week off, then booked a flight to my hometown. That evening, over tea in her cozy kitchen, Aunt Sarah asked the question I'd been pondering myself: "What are you planning to give her?" I smiled, pulling out my phone to show her the confirmation email. A luxury vacation package to the Maldives. 2 weeks at a 5-star resort, first-class flights included. Worth about $15,000. Aunt Sarah's eyes widened. "Melanie, that's too much. She doesn't deserve it." "Oh, I know she doesn't," I laughed, taking a sip of tea. "But can you imagine her face when she realizes what she's been missing all these years?" The daughter she threw away turned out to be more successful than she could have imagined. I want to see her reaction when she realizes just how wrong she was about me. "You're a little bit evil," Aunt Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. "I love it." The evening of Mom's birthday, I slipped on my Chanel dress, elegant in its simplicity, with a price tag that could have bought 10 of the flashy outfits I spotted later that night. I deliberately took a taxi to the restaurant, amused by how this would play into their assumptions about my life. Le Blanc turned out to be exactly what I expected, the kind of place that impressed people who'd never eaten at a truly high-end restaurant. The kind of place that served frozen seafood but put gold leaf on the desserts. I'd had business dinners at places that made this look like a diner. The hostess led me to a private room where the party was already in full swing. Mom sat at the head of the table, wearing a sequin dress that sparkled under the chandelier. Richard was beside her, and Brandon and Emma flanked them like royal heirs. The rest of the seats were filled with relatives I hadn't seen in over a decade: Aunt Linda, who used to pinch my cheeks too hard, Cousin Rachel, who always bragged about her kids, and various other faces from my past. Mom's eyes barely flickered over me before her lip curled slightly. "Oh, Melanie, you came. You could have dressed up a bit more for the occasion." I took my seat at the far end of the table, watching the show unfold. Aunt Linda gave Mom a scented candle set. "It's from that nice shop at the mall," she explained proudly. Mom cooed over it like it was diamonds. Cousin Rachel presented a gift card to a local spa. "For a day of pampering," she announced. More excited squeals from Mom. The gifts continued: a cookbook, a decorative vase, a basket of bath products. Mom treated each one like a precious treasure, making sure to emphasize how thoughtful and perfect each gift was. Then came Brandon and Emma's moment. They stood up together, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. "Mom," Brandon said, and it still felt wrong hearing him call her that, "Emma and I pooled our money to get you something special." Emma pulled out her phone and showed a photo. "It's a 65-inch smart TV. We already had it delivered and mounted in your living room." Mom burst into tears, pulling them both into a tight hug. "My wonderful, generous children. I can't believe you did this. You must have saved for months." Finally, all eyes turned to me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. Mom's expression darkened immediately. "What's this supposed to be?" "Open it and see," I suggested quietly. But she didn't. Instead, her face turned red with anger. "This is exactly what I expected from you," she spat. "You show up here in that plain dress, probably the only nice thing you own. You take a taxi because you can't afford a car. And now you give me this tiny box? What could possibly be in here that's worth giving? A gift card to McDonald's?" She threw the box back at me. It skidded across the table, leaving a scratch in the cheap veneer. Brandon and Emma snickered behind their hands. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others seemed to be enjoying the drama. Richard just kept eating his dessert as if nothing was happening. I picked up the box calmly, brushing off the tablecloth crumbs that had stuck to its elegant wrapping. The room had gone quiet, waiting to see what I would do next. "You know what's funny, Mom?" I said, my voice steady. "In this little box is a receipt for a 2-week luxury vacation to the Maldives. First-class flights, 5-star resort, everything included. Worth $15,000. The color drained from her face. Emma dropped her fork with a clatter. That's That's impossible, Mom stammered. You couldn't afford something like that. You're obviously lying. I couldn't help but laugh. You'd know whether I could afford it or not if you'd shown any interest in my life these past 12 years. But let me catch you up, I'm a senior director at Reynolds Marketing Group. I own my apartment in the city. And that taxi you mocked? I took it because I didn't want to leave my Mercedes parked in this neighborhood. Brandon's mouth hung open. Emma had stopped giggling. But since you're so convinced I'm a loser, I continued, tucking the box back into my purse, and you clearly don't want anything from me, I won't spoil your birthday any further. Enjoy your TV, I hear the resolution is almost as good as the one in my home theater. I walked out with my head high, the click of my heels echoing in the sudden silence. The maitre d' called a taxi, and I headed straight to Aunt Sarah's house. She was waiting up for me, 2 cups of tea already steaming on the coffee table. I told her everything that had happened. Some people never change, she sighed, shaking her head. Your mother's always been more interested in appearances than reality. We were still talking when my phone started ringing. An unknown number, but I knew who it was. Melanie, sweetheart. Mom's voice dripped with honey, I do not know where she got my number. I've been thinking about what happened. Have you? I replied coolly. Yes, and I realize now that I may have been hasty. If you're still willing to give me that gift, I'd love to accept it. We could use this as a fresh start. I want to be part of your life again. We're family. No, I said, finally understanding something. We're not family. We're just people who share DNA. And you didn't want to restore our relationship, you just want that vacation package. I hung up. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing after I left town. Mom called from different numbers, her cell, the house phone, even Richard's phone. When she realized I wouldn't pick up, the messages started flooding in. Melanie, please call me back. We need to talk about this. I've been thinking about what you said about your job. Maybe you could help Brandon get started in marketing? He's very creative. Emma's been saying she'd love to intern at a big company like yours. It would look so good on her college applications. The house needs some repairs, and since you're doing so well. Each message was more transparent than the last. No apologies, no acknowledgement of the past, just an endless stream of requests and hints about my money. It was like watching a desperate gambler trying to win back losses, except what Mom had lost wasn't money, it was her relationship with her daughter. I read each message with a strange detachment, like I was studying a case study for work. The tactics were almost impressive in their variety: guilt, I'm your mother, how can you ignore me? Flattery, you've become such a successful woman, manipulation, family should help family, and even threats, I'll tell everyone how you abandoned your mother. Your mother's been calling me nonstop, Aunt Sarah told me over the phone a week after I'd returned home. She showed up at my house today, if you can believe it. Demanded I give her your address. What did you tell her? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I told her to get off my property before I called the police, Aunt Sarah chuckled. You should have seen her face. She kept saying she had a right to know where her daughter lives. I reminded her that she gave up that right years ago. I could picture Mom standing on Aunt Sarah's porch, probably wearing one of her expensive outfits, trying to bully her way into getting what she wanted. It was the same pattern I'd watched my whole life, but now I could see it clearly for what it was. She didn't take it well, Aunt Sarah continued. Started ranting about how ungrateful we both were, how she'd sacrificed everything for you. The neighbors probably heard everything. When she finally realized I wasn't going to give in, she stormed off to her car. But Melanie, be careful. She seemed desperate. I already blocked her on everything, I assured Aunt Sarah. Social media, phone, email, everything. And security at my office knows not to let her in if she shows up. After we hung up, I walked through my apartment, looking at everything I'd built for myself. The modern furniture I'd chosen, the art on the walls, the view of the city from my windows, all of it earned through my own hard work. I thought about Mom's messages, about her sudden interest in my life now that she knew I had money. In the end, it was almost funny. She'd thrown away a relationship with her daughter for the appearance of a perfect family, and now she was desperate to get back into my life for the appearance of success. But she'd taught me one valuable lesson: family isn't about legal documents. It's about love, support, and being there for each other through good times and bad. I had that with Aunt Sarah. The next morning, I called the travel agency and changed the name on the Maldives vacation package to Sarah Carter. When I told my aunt, she tried to refuse, but I insisted. "You deserve this more than she ever did," I said. "You've been more of a mother to me than she ever was." Aunt Sarah hugged me tight, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.